Hello everyone! So I have some re-sleeving to do in my binders today, just changing out some hollow sleeves that I use, and I wanted to discuss a K-pop related topic while doing so. So I put up a poll on my community page with a few different options for topics I could discuss, and I do plan to talk about the other topics like in later videos like this, but the topic that won was class awareness in K-pop. Privilege, wealth, idols, and collectors. I'm actually really excited because this is the one that I wanted to talk about the most, to be honest. It's definitely the one I have the most to say about, I guess, to the point that I'm worried that I'm not gonna have enough time to cover everything. I certainly won't be able to cover everything in enough depth. But yeah, this is just gonna be a sort of free-form discussion about my thoughts and opinions on this topic. I do have a rough outline of subtopics that I want to cover within the idea of socioeconomic class and K-pop. And I'll give an outline later so you have an idea of the subtopics I'm going to cover, and I will try to put timestamps. Again, this is going to be kind of freeform, but if you do want to skip ahead to something, hopefully that will help. So the general things that I want to cover in this video. First, I want to talk briefly about the idea of wealth and the collection community, including my background and some sort of specific financial details. Then I think the bulk will probably be more focused on how socioeconomic class intersects with idols and the K-pop system. So for that, I want to talk about the trainee system and who gets to debut, the idea of idols deserving our support or deserving wealth and success. And at some point, hopefully I can also fit in the ideas of beauty and talent and how those are ideas that are presented as something you're born with but are actually manufactured by wealth and privilege. So before I actually jump into those topics, I wanted to explain also what I'm doing in my binder so you know what I'm doing here. So this is my NCT binder, and what I want to do is change out the hollow sleeves that I have Haechan in. I have him in these sort of solid hollow sleeves, which are my favorite kind of hollow sleeves, to be honest, but I find that they only really look nice and reflective in certain lighting, and especially in videos they tend to look cloudy more than anything, just because of the lighting and the way the camera films. So I'm going to switch him out for these heart sleeves that I got. These are slightly different than the ones that I use for 17. They have little flowers instead of little squares and a slightly different heart shape, but they're actually by the same brand. They're by Black Lotus, and I think they're really cute. So that's what I'm going to use for Haechan going forward, I think, because I think they show up better on camera. All right, let's just get into it. So first I want to say that the general point that I want to get across with all these different subtopics that I'm talking about is the idea of how the socioeconomic class that you're in, specifically how money and wealth buy you freedom and security. And when you have freedom and security, you can take risks that other people cannot afford to take. And when you can afford to take big risks, you are more likely to receive tremendous rewards like celebrity and fame and success, or even a really expansive photocard collection. That's the general thesis of all these topics. I will say this first part where I talk about the collecting community, I don't have as much of a point with this part. I just sort of want to provide context, especially for younger fans, I think. Because I think that just based on the comments that I see about oh, on other people's channels, I've never gotten these, but on other people's channels about oh, are you rich? How do you afford this? Blah, blah, blah. I think a lot of younger K-pop fans don't have any sort of financial context for how much collecting costs or how people afford collecting. And I just wanted to share my specific story, my financial background over the years as I've been a K-pop fan, and how my financial status at various times has contributed to my having or not having a collection. Because I think it's really important for people to, I don't know, have some idea of how this stuff works. And, I want to talk about it because I typically don't hear collectors talking about money that much, which is not a slight against creators or collectors that don't. Money is very, very personal, and obviously you, first of all, don't owe anyone anything and are free to talk about or not talk about any topic that you want. But also, if you talk about money, you're opening yourself up to a lot of criticism, and especially if you're a larger creator, I don't know what it's like to receive that level of scrutiny, so I certainly don't blame people for not wanting to talk about it. But anyway, just to get in my background, and I will try to make it as brief as possible. So I grew up what I would call working class. Like, everybody in my family either still works in a factory or spent most of their life working in a factory or a warehouse or something like that, you know. My family pretty much lived paycheck to paycheck. We did not have savings. We didn't really go on vacations. I qualified for like the free lunch program in my state. In college, I was a Pell Grant recipient. If you don't know what that is, it's just the federal grant program for students of a lower socioeconomic status, or like students with the greatest financial need. And what I will say is that, like, I'm not saying that to like martyr myself or something like that. I was never homeless, you know, I was never starving. So in that way, you know, I had my own level of privilege relative to certain other people. But, you know, like, when my laptop broke in college, I, as a computer science major, still could not afford $200, you know, to get a new laptop, to the point that I just had to go to, neither I nor my parents could swing that at that time. So I just had to go to a computer lab for all my coursework until a very good friend of mine took pity on me and graciously bought a laptop for me. So that is the socioeconomic context that I was operating in when I first became a K-pop fan. I became a K-pop fan when I graduated from high school, and for the 5 years that I was in college, I was a huge K-pop fan, and I never once bought anything related to K-pop. Like I said, I had significant financial aid, I had loans, I was working 2 jobs the whole time, and still I had very, very little disposable income. Like, the only disposable income I had was basically devoted towards like $2 double wells on Wednesday. Sorry, drink responsibly. Anyway, so all that to say that, like, I'm in a weird place with that, because it's like I see a lot of like young people, or I guess people who, like, you know, don't have enough disposable income to buy K-pop stuff, sort of like lamenting that in comments and stuff. And on the one hand, I can relate because I was in that financial position, but on the other hand, I can't relate because at that time, I was not engaging with K-pop fandom at all. I literally did not even know that photocards were a thing that existed. This was from like 2012 to 2017, by the way. Did not know that photocards existed. So in a way, I was lucky because I didn't know what I was missing out on. I didn't know that there was this whole world of the K-pop community that I was locked out of participating in due to my socioeconomic status at the time. Now, I say that and provide that context to contrast with the position that I'm in today. So I was lucky that I was able to graduate with a computer science degree, and I got a full-time job as a software engineer, and today I make 6 figures as the salary for my full-time job. And with that, I have a level of freedom and disposable income that I certainly never had in my early years as a K-pop fan. And it was after a couple years of being out of college that I started my K-pop collection. And I don't say that to suggest that you have to earn that much to have a K-pop collection like mine. There are people that have K-pop collections the size of mine or larger who, you know, might make more or less than I do. I only say that just to provide one piece of context. I can only tell you what I know about myself. I can't tell you what I know about other people. And I know people that make less than me can sustain a collection of this size because I'm not spending my whole disposable income on K-pop. You know, I put money in savings. I spend money on going to the movies and like doing other things, you know? So that's not what I'm trying to get at with providing that context. What I'm trying to say is that today, with the money that I make, I have a level of freedom and security that I never had before. I can afford to do things like spend slightly more for a rare photocard that I really want occasionally, with the knowledge that it will not impact my ability to pay for rent or to have health insurance or to pay for food. I can spend money on K-pop and know that it's not going to make a difference in my ability to survive. You know, when I was younger, and when you live paycheck to paycheck, you're essentially one emergency away from like financial ruin and disaster. And you just have to count on luck that does not occur. I was able to graduate with my degree, and get a job that put me at a socioeconomic level higher than the one that I grew up in. Not because I was smarter or better than other people, right? But because I was lucky enough to not have any disasters occur while I was earning my degree that impacted my ability to like get to the other side of it. Do you know what I'm saying? You know, and before I ever was in the position that I'm in now, I didn't even fully realize how different it is to have the freedom of knowing that one emergency will not make you homeless. You know, one emergency will not impact your ability to pay the electric bill. And anyway, like I said, this part doesn't really have like a huge point. I just wanted to put that information out there for anyone that has like no context for how people are paying for or like building K-pop collections. There's one piece of data, and maybe there are other people talking about it that can provide more data. But that is really just the start of what I want to get at with the idol industry and the K-pop industry, and like the way that growing up in a certain socioeconomic class affords you freedoms that other people do not have. And so first, what I want to talk about with that is like the trainee system. So from the start, right, the trainee system is parents, after let's assume you like pass your auditions or whatever, and you are accepted to be a trainee. It depends on the company, but there is a certain degree of your parents having to support you while you are a trainee. Now, some companies pay more or less for their trainees. Of course, we all know of the notion of trainee debt, where they, oops, this sleeve is defective, where they, you know, pay for certain things for trainees, but then withhold wages from them later, which frankly I think should be criminal, but that's another thing. But, you know, to some degree, idols have talked a lot about, say, having to have their parents send them money to do things, or having to work, or in the cases of idols that don't have parents that can send them money to support them, having to work part-time jobs on the side while they're a trainee. And we all know the kind of like really rigorous class schedule that a trainee has. So from the start, you have your first barrier to entry, which is that you need to be at a socioeconomic level where you can afford to become a trainee in the first place. Whatever amount your parents have to pay to support you, your parents have to be able to afford that. The transportation has to be afforded, right? To send you away from home, potentially, if you live in another city, or to just get to the company building, you know, every day for class. And then on top of that, there is a substantial privilege for the trainees who do not have to worry about getting money to live while they are a trainee. So imagine if on top of that rigorous class schedule, you are also trying to juggle a part-time job. How much more tired are you going to be? How much more stressed are you going to be? And how much of a disadvantage does that put on you in terms of how you're performing in your classes? So if you add all that up, the barriers to entry to becoming a trainee, the barriers to entry to performing well as a trainee, you can see how that stacks up over time to create an industry where so many idols come from very privileged or wealthy backgrounds. We talk a lot about underdog stories in K-pop because they're compelling. Everybody wants to root for an underdog. But when you start breaking down like idol backgrounds, yes, there are people that come from like a lower socioeconomic class. For example, there are people like me who, you know, had parents that met working in a factory who eventually became software engineers, and were lucky enough and got enough lucky breaks to end up, you know, in a better position in the future. But if you are relying on luck, you are much less likely to make it than if you can rely on certain things to be paid for and taken care of for you, so you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to think about it. And I'll get into that later with the idea of like supporting the artist as well, especially when we're talking about like artists that are frankly very successful and are doing well. People talk so much about how hard idols work and how hard the idol schedule is. And for the record, I'm not trying to downplay like the abusive side of the industry or how exploitative it can be a lot of times, especially towards young people. But I also think that sometimes, to some degree, that narrative is kind of a lie and kind of manufactured. I'll explain that in more detail later. But first, I also kind of want to briefly talk about like beauty and talent, because it's kind of related to what I was saying a second ago about how if you are starting from a more privileged economic position, every aspect of being a trainee and getting to the place of debuting is easier. And related to that, I feel like I have to talk about something that I see. These are comments that I see all the time, and I'm probably taking them too seriously because I take everything too seriously. Because people like to hype up their faves, and this is probably just people doing that. But you know, you see so many comments talking about idols and specifically saying things like, you know, they can't believe how beautiful they are, or how could someone be born this beautiful? They're so lucky to be born this beautiful. How could someone be so talented at so many things at such a young age? This is the one that bothers me the most. You'll see someone talking about how, like, oh my god, I'm 18 and I can't do anything, and this idol is 18 and they're good at singing, dancing, rapping, and they're good looking, blah, blah, blah. And that one makes me really sad. And so that's why I want to talk about these ideas, because I think that the ideas of beauty and talent that idols are putting forward are intrinsically constructions of wealth. I'm going to talk about talent first, just because I think beauty is like a more loaded subject, and so I think people get like more upset about it, or it's more of a touchy subject, I should say. But when it comes to talent, you know, as I mentioned before, and as we've kind of established, a huge proportion of idols come from very privileged economic backgrounds. And as I mentioned that, I realized that I didn't provide a ton of specific like data on the fact that is true. I just explained like the forces at work behind why it is true. If you are skeptical, I encourage you to like look into it more and do more research on it. It's absolutely the case that most idols are coming from fairly well-off backgrounds in the first place, or at least comfortable. Given that that is the case, it really frustrates me to see a lot of people comparing themselves to idols at the same age, because, you know, when I was in high school, I was working, you know, I worked part-time at a warehouse to help like get the money to afford to send myself to a better school than the one in my school district. When I was in college, as I said before, I was working like 2 to 3 jobs at any given time on top of school in order to just like afford to live and like buy textbooks and shit. Now let's imagine a world where you don't have to worry about any of that. You already have the money that you need to pay for food and rent and a good school district and, you know, shampoo and literally any necessity that you could possibly need. How much more free time and mental real estate do you have to devote to bettering yourself in any area that you choose? A tremendous amount, right? Talent at a young age is not something, and you don't see this just with idols, by the way. You also see it with like children of wealthy people having like being able to like play piano and speak 3 languages and like do all this crazy shit by the time they're going into college and like, you know, playing a sport and doing all this other stuff. Being accomplished at a young age is not a function of your ability or your intelligence or your potential. It's a function of how much privilege you were born with, primarily. That is the number one factor. How much free time do you have to devoting to bettering yourself? How much free time or how much money do your parents have to pay for these extracurricular activities to help you improve yourself in certain ways? What I'm trying to get at with explaining all this or like ranting about all this is that talent is a function of wealth and money. And by talent, I mean what we as a society call talent and recognize as talent. Because, for example, I think my parents are very smart people. My parents are absolutely just as smart as me. They love learning, they love reading. They're the whole reason that I like learning and reading. But what our society calls smart is so often a function of the kind of higher education you have, the kind of college degrees you have, how many you have, what kind of degree you have. You know, like STEM certainly is looked at better in a lot of ways. But that doesn't mean that people who don't have college degrees aren't smart, you know? And that's what I'm getting at with this, is that like idols are not necessarily just more talented than everybody else. They're wealthier than everybody else, so we call them talented. And again, I'm speaking generally here. I don't mean every single person. I mean in general. And that is very, very, very much true for the idea of beauty as well. And this is hard to talk about as well because people don't like to talk about plastic surgery. It's like very taboo. And a lot of people don't have a lot of understanding of the kind of plastic surgery or cosmetic procedures that are available today. Their only conception of it is like a really botched nose job or like something like that, like really severe under the knife procedures. But again, I very firmly, and this is me talking about my opinion, so like feel free to disagree and like talk about it in the comments, but it is my opinion that there is some degree to which celebrities, you have to be born with a certain amount of what society considers attractiveness to be an idol, but so much of idol attractiveness, especially if you look at like I mean, look at like an idol's like younger pictures, right? They look normal most of the time. Some of them stand out, but I truly think the vast majority of them just look like kids, which really stresses to me how much beauty is a construct that is created. There are so many cosmetic procedures, and I mean, not even talking just about idols here. I'm talking about like Western celebrities as well. Cosmetic procedures you can buy that are very, very subtle. People think that like getting a nose job means like the whole shape of your nose changes, when it can be like the most subtle thing ever, just the slightest change in proportions. And if you have money, you can pay for something that's skilled. And I'm not saying that to like shame idols or be like, oh, it's so terrible that they're doing that, blah, blah, blah. I don't care, you know? It's part of their job. But what I don't like is the way that young people look at it and feel worse about themselves and their worth and their capabilities, when the fact is that for most people, if you had the kind of money that these companies are investing into idols' appearances, you could look that good too, or you could look almost that good. I really truly believe that. And I know I kind of mentioned this already when I mentioned like that I'm not trying to like shame idols for the cosmetic procedures that they've gotten. In general, when I'm talking about like idol wealth and privilege, I'm not doing that to say like I hate them, they're bad people, they should suffer, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. I'm not trying to say anything like that. I'm trying to provide context for the rest of us. It's complicated because the relationship that we have with idols is, to use a buzzword, parasocial. People have emotional connection with idols. They want to relate to them. They feel for them. They want them to be happy. And that contributes to this thing where people are like trying to make idols relatable to us, when the fact is that most of them are not relatable. And I think it's harmful to look at these people and say, this beauty standard that they are creating is something that is attainable by the regular person. And if you're not attaining it, it's just because you weren't born good enough. Or this level of specific kind of talent, this level of talent that they're upholding and creating is something that you could do if you just worked harder, but you don't have it because you're not working hard enough. That is what I'm trying to push back against, because I truly do not believe that celebrities are the hardest working people in the world. And that's actually a good transition for the part I want to get into next, which is this idea of supporting the artist, and sort of tied to that, the idea of idols deserving wealth and success because of the degree of the level of hard work that they put in. So first, I have to put some caveats with this, because I know that we can't really group the entire idol industry into one group. You know, there's like this upper class of idols who are successful enough to be either comfortable financially or exorbitantly wealthy. And then there is a larger, probably, group of idols who are, you know, like your Nugu groups, so to speak, people who suffer more from the exploitative side of the industry, who are not earning money because the companies have decided that they haven't paid off their debt, or whatever the fuck that means. And these are really like two different groups that are hard to talk about in the same conversation because their situations are so substantially different. So I will say that when I'm talking about this, I'm mainly talking about that upper class of idols. So like your NCTs, your 17s, your IUs, your Red Velvets, your Twices, your, I don't know, all your hype groups, your SM groups, your JYP groups. Because I don't want to suggest with what I'm about to say that like it is important to support artists. And what I mean by that is like if you are comfortable enough financially and you are enjoying the art that is created by someone who needs the support, I do think it's the right thing to do to support those artists, you know, to provide them compensation for the art that they are providing you for free, essentially. Because artists are important and they deserve comfort and to be supported and to be able to create art freely. But that's not exactly what I'm talking about mainly. I want to talk about this upper group of artists. Like I said, that group of artists that I mentioned before who are doing more than well enough financially. Because even with groups like this, groups like NCT, I see people talking about, or like 17, I see people talking about how important it is to support the artist, whether that be like through your time, your precious time, by the way. People act like streaming is like nothing. Your time is extremely valuable, and it's like absolutely not nothing to devote time streaming. By all means, do whatever you want to do, but like when talking about other people about it, don't act like it's like nothing to ask people to devote a significant portion of their time to contribute to the success of a group that's already very wealthy, you know? But more specifically, there's this idea that I see where there's this whole thing that I see a lot with certain fans where they will post photos of idols with this like really expensive branded clothing items or blah blah blah, or these fancy watches or their nice cars or whatever. And they're posting it in a way where they're sort of like celebrating and like really valuing that wealth that idol has, like being like, damn, they're so rich, in a way to suggest that it's like amazing or impressive that they're so rich. Or even outright saying like, damn, they really deserve this for how hard they're working. They deserve, you know, to be able to buy a $40,000 watch because of how hard they're working. And on the one hand, I get it, because the stories that we hear about the idol industry and its like exploitative side are so extreme. The stories that idols and companies tell are all about the worst part of their working life, which is like, especially during like comeback season, when they're like getting up really early, they're like hardly sleeping, they're doing a ton of shit all the time. It truly is like a fucked up, like exploitative working schedule. It's like very, very messed up. However, people will use that to justify the exorbitant wealth that these idols have and say like, they deserve to have this much because of how hard they've been working. It's our duty as fans to support them and help them be more wealthy as compensation for how much work they have put in for us. And to that I say, no one deserves that level of success and wealth. Genuinely. I'm not saying that people deserve to be exploited and worked that hard, but what I am saying is there is so much of the population, such a huge portion of just the American population, I'm not even talking about the rest of the world, and I'm only not talking about them because I don't know as much, who works that much and then does not get to go home to the privileges that wealth affords. And what I mean by that is, when an idol is working, you know, let's say like a 16 to 20 hour workday, and by that I mean like are only home for 4 hours. When they go home, and again, this is for this group of idols that are very successful, they go home to a nice apartment where the rent is paid, and they have enough money to order any food they want, or in some cases they have someone working at their apartment that cooks food for them. There are like plenty of groups that do that. They have someone that cooks for them at home. They have maids that clean their apartments for them. And then on top of that, you know, they don't have to worry about managing, gee, is the bill paid this month? They have someone that is paying their bills. They don't have to worry about, you know, is this on time and have I paid it yet? Someone is managing all that for them. They have managers that are dealing. They don't even have to worry about when do I have to get to work tomorrow, because they have a manager that's going to send them their schedule to tell them when they're going to get there, and sometimes even wake them up in their house because their manager lives with them. That's not uncommon, right? And of course, they don't have to worry about healthcare. Contrast that with, I know plenty of people that are working 12-hour swing shifts with an hour-and-a-half commute each way to the place that they work. So they are spending about as much time at home as idols in certain times of their career. And when they get home, they come home to a house that they have to figure out how to clean. They have to figure out how to make food for themselves. They have to pay attention to, when am I going to pay these bills? Are these bills being managed? Who's going to schedule a doctor appointment for me? What time do I have to be at work tomorrow? Do you get what I'm getting at with this? Like, I understand the impulse to be like, this working schedule is like inhuman and not okay, and they deserve to be compensated for it. But my question is, why do we have that energy for celebrities who can afford to not have to worry about all this other shit, all this other stuff that comes with living as a human? Why do we have the energy for these celebrities and not that energy for people who work in factories or warehouses, who are working exactly just as much for decades, right? And they don't get like downtime between comebacks to relax. you know? And they don't get maids to help clean up after them and do their laundry for them or cook for them or anything like that. And I know people have the energy for celebrities and not the working class, because celebrities are pretty and they're on TV and YouTube and they entertain us and make us laugh, and we know who they are and we don't know who those other people are. But should we have that energy for these celebrities? Should we be spending so much time talking about how they deserve a Rolex or this fancy car or these super expensive clothes? You know, if they deserve that, then there's a huge portion of the world that deserves that too. I do think that everybody deserves, you know, shelter and healthcare and food and education. And there are so many people who work just as hard as idols who don't even get that, right? So it frustrates me a little bit to see, I don't know, to see how much the K-pop industry like sort of values and upholds wealth as like the best thing a person can be, like the best thing you can be is rich. It really upsets me, honestly, because it's sort of a reflection of like this societal ideal that if you are rich, it is because you deserve it. And if you are not rich, it is because you don't deserve it. I mean, it's sort of like what I was getting at when I was talking about my own background, where I was trying to say, like, I didn't go from the class I was in to where I am now because I worked harder or deserved it more than people who didn't have it. And similarly, idols are not celebrities because they are the hardest working people in the world. And again, I'm not trying to say that I hate K-pop idols or whatever. It's like this side of K-pop that I really struggle with, because as much as I love the art that the industry produces, I love the choreography, I love the music, I love like the graphic design of the albums and stuff. But along with it, there's like this really toxic, gross side of it that flaunts and celebrates wealth as the greatest indicator of success and the best thing that a person can be. And it's hard to reconcile. I get a lot of like cognitive dissonance about it sometimes, because it's like, it's so hard to engage in appreciating it without running into that side of it. Especially now as I've gotten older and I've started engaging with other fans more. Like I said, when I was younger and did not have the means to really participate in the materialistic side of it anyway, I was blissfully ignorant and unaware of it because I didn't know anyone that liked K-pop, so there was no one to tell me about this whole other side of the K-pop world. And it sort of ties into what I was talking about with the collecting community as well, where it's like so much of the collecting community on YouTube, and like a measure of your success is like how large your collection is or how many groups you collect or whatever. And it just feels like another side, a less intense, right? Because it's a lower level, but it's still just another side of that whole celebration of material success as being better than anything else. And sometimes it even makes me question like collecting in general, you know, like especially comparing where I used to be with where I am now. What am I doing spending money on something so impractical? You know, I still have a lot of guilt left over from like that time period where, you know, if I wanted to spend a couple dollars on a soda, I would have to check my bank account first. And you know what? A lot of times did not have the money, did not have the couple dollars for that soda. And sometimes I can let go enough to like enjoy my collection and rationalize it like it's okay to like have things that make you happy. And other times I just think like the me in the past would think I'm so stupid, would think I'm so ridiculous. I don't know, I don't really share that often I'm kind of like totally off the rails of my outline, but so who knows how I'm gonna timestamp this, but that's not something that I talk about very often on this channel. It's like, you know, in general, I'm just sharing like, here's the new stuff that I'm adding and here's the new stuff that I got and blah, blah, blah. And I don't really talk about what's going on in my head all the time, which is like, I'm constantly going back and forth between this is so fun and I like doing this and I'm allowed to have material objects that make me happy. And, you know, I don't deserve this. Nobody deserves this. Isn't this such a waste when I could be doing more with this, or when someone else could be doing more with this? I don't know. And I don't know if other collectors are like thinking that or going through that, if they also have like if they ever get those intense, like, I should just sell everything and move on with my life and never think about it again. I don't know if other collectors are having those thoughts, because I haven't heard anyone talk about it. Although if you know someone who has, like, let me know. I'd love to hear someone else's thoughts on it. Or if you have thoughts on it, like, please tell me. I'm not like saying that to say like, oh, I'm gonna give up my whole collection. Like, I'm on the verge, I'm on the brink. I've been thinking about this literally like since I started my collection, so it's really not a change in my mindset. But yeah, I've kind of gone a bit off subject with that. It's tough because this topic is so large, and I truly feel like money and class influence every aspect of your life so intensely that it is honestly hard to explain or touch on in a video. I just know that when I'm editing this, I'm gonna be thinking like, God, you like left out so much that you should have said, so much context that you should have said. You didn't treat that subject very well. And just know that, like, I know. If you think like, oh, well, your thoughts are a little underdeveloped on that topic, it's because it's hard to share in a video. It's really hard to just go off the cuff and explain it succinctly. But I hope I got across like what I was trying to get across, which is that, you know, there's a lot of the way we uplift and value and celebrate idols that has to do with like the parasocial relationship that has been created between fans and idols, but also so much of the way they are celebrated and what they are celebrated for is so primarily a function of socioeconomic class that it's like hard to look away from once you notice it. And it's really upsetting to see people getting worked up or upset about or letting K-pop make them feel bad when it's just like rich people doing rich people shit. And of course, there's a large portion of the way we view idols, a large portion of it is very related to just our societal stereotypes about money and success in general. That is a huge contributing factor, of course. But on top of that, I want to add that I'm gonna get on my soapbox here and complain about K-pop companies, but a large portion of that is also encouraged and deliberately fostered by K-pop companies. And what I mean by that is the relationship between idols and the company and the artist, right? The companies, above all else, want fans to relate to and to feel emotionally for the idol. Because if you feel bad for the idol, if you care about them and want them to be happy and want them to succeed, you are more likely to spend money on them. And again, I'm not saying that if you spend money on an idol because you want them to be happy, you're the bad person. Actually, you're like a normal human with like empathy, and you're doing what humans with empathy do, which is care about other people. You are right in this situation. But the companies are deliberately exploiting that, right? They're exploiting human emotions by getting people attached to idols so that they can get money from them, so that they can fund their company. That's like the whole business model of the idol industry. And, you know, I'm complicit. I buy a lot of K-pop albums, so, you know, I'm part of the problem. But I say that because I want to bring it back to what I was talking about earlier with this idea of K-pop idols deserving success and wealth because of their hard work. Again, I'm very much not trying to like underplay the parts of the industry that are essentially like workers' rights issues, right? Like they're exploiting their working population. And I don't want to deny that, especially for the huge portion of idols that don't see monetary compensation for their work because of the stupid way that contracts work in K-pop. I'm not talking about that, and I'm not like downplaying that or saying that it doesn't exist. However, with these like big idol groups that we all know are doing well financially, you will notice that the companies still very much in the content that they create, pushes the idea that idols are working crazy, crazy hard and have no free time and, are like really struggling to do the work that they do. So you'll get a lot of behind the scenes videos that show them looking really tired, and you'll get a lot of like exaggerated stories about, how during the worst parts of their schedule, they like don't get to sleep a lot, or they're doing all this other stuff, or they're like how little sleep they got the other night, blah, blah, blah. And I'm not saying that idols are are acting. I'm sure they really are tired during those time periods because they're human. And of course you would be tired working that much. But what you have to remember with the content that we watch from idols is that at the end of the day, it is being produced by the company to create an image for us as fans to consume. They're not showing us the behind the scenes to be like, isn't this interesting to see like the behind the scenes of what goes into making a K-pop choreography? When they are choosing the footage to make these videos, they're editing it a certain way, and they're choosing the shots where they look tired or talk about their schedule or complain about their schedule because they know that it makes fans feel sympathetic towards them. And it works. I mean, I feel sympathetic towards them, and again, I know that they are human and that they really are tired when they are working those crazy schedules, and I do sympathize with that. And I can't help but feel cynical about it a lot of times because I know that what is being presented to me is very focused on highlighting the most vulnerable times that idols are having so that I feel bad for them, so that I feel emotionally obligated to support them. Because what we don't talk about are how much time idols get between comebacks. And sure, between that time period, they're doing photo shoots and recording songs and doing dance practice sometimes, but they have way more free time than people think between comebacks. I mean, I've seen people, like, not infrequently, I see people saying things like, how do idols have time to date? And it's like, guys, they have a lot of free time to date. They have plenty of time for dating. For most people, human relationships, like one of the most important things that for a lot of people, they absolutely have plenty of time for that. And I don't blame people for sort of like misunderstanding or like being surprised by that, because of course the perspective that is given from companies is like, oh my God, idols are so busy. They never, ever, ever have free time, ever. But they are presenting it that way on purpose. They're cherry picking the time periods where idols don't have any free time, which there are certainly times in their schedule where they don't, and presenting that to us because, one, it's the most interesting thing going on because that's when stuff is happening, and two, it's the part that makes you feel sympathetic towards the idol and makes you feel bad for them, and leaving out all the times where they're like just hanging out and like not doing anything. Not that I think that idols should be like filming themselves on vacation, because like, God, if your whole life is on camera, you definitely deserve time off camera. I can't imagine what that feels like. But, I wish there was more media literacy regarding this stuff, like being communicated to people. There are two sides to the industry, and it's so important to remember that, on the one hand, companies are doing absolutely everything they can to make us feel bad for idols, to make us care about them and relate to them, to make them seem like us, even though most of the time, again, socioeconomic status-wise, they are not the same as us. And then on the other hand, there's this whole other side of the industry where these companies are essentially exploiting these young people that are working for free and making money off of them. You know what that reminds me of? It is sort of wild how, previously I mentioned how it's sort of hard to talk about the two different classes of K-pop idols in the same conversation because their economic status is so different. And like the way that the amount of privileges that they are afforded within the industry are so different. But what that really drives home to me is how much the K-pop industry is built on exploiting young people. And I mean that in two ways. One, it's built on exploiting young people in the sense that, they are trying to sign these young talented artists to exploitative contracts where they claim it's like a debt thing and you have to pay back your debt. I think it's bullshit. It's an excuse to not pay your workers for the work that they are doing. So there's this huge portion of the industry that is making profits off of people who are not getting paid for their labor, which is disgusting to me. And then there's the other level where the young people that are being exploited are not the idols, but they are the fans. Where, honestly, I could honestly do a whole video on the idea of like, I know it's like a buzzword these days, but the idea of like parasocial relationships in K-pop and how it's my least favorite part of being a K-pop fan. But yeah, on one hand, we've got the idol industry exploiting these young people who don't know better into signing these entertainment contracts that are totally disadvantageous to them, except in the very rare case where they, become incredibly famous. And you also have this industry that is built on exploiting the emotions of teenagers. And what I mean by that is, with the idol industry, what the focus is on is, as much as it is about the music, it is about the art that's created, but more than that, K-pop idol companies they're not primarily selling music, they're primarily selling the idol, right? The idol's personality and their persona. And what they are banking on is that people will feel emotionally attached, like I said before, emotionally attached to the idol and want to spend money on them. And that is the entire reason that the target demographic of K-pop is teenagers. Because what is a segment of the population that, one, has an above average normal of free time, typically, and is, desperate for emotional connection and is trying to forge relationships with other humans for the first time in their life, and also is emotionally immature enough that they haven't really fully, generally, learned to create boundaries, which of course makes them easier to exploit. Of course, that segment is teenagers. And again, I'm not saying that to say it's teenagers' fault. It 1000% is not. It's the fault of these companies who are very cynically looking for a population of people that are vulnerable and saying, how can we market ourselves into those vulnerabilities, right? Like, how can we take advantage of those to get money? It's really frustrating. It's really frustrating as a big fan of K-pop, because it's like, I say that and it's like, that's the frustration of like living in capitalism, period, that you can't like anything unproblematically. You know what I'm saying? There is no industry that is free from exploitation. Oh God. Listen. Okay, I'm sorry. Here we go. We've crossed into, we've been walking on the line this whole video, and now we've crossed it in terms of like my personal beliefs. But yeah, what I'm saying is that's the frustrating thing about not just being a K-pop fan, but being a fan of anything under capitalism, which is that it is impossible to like anything unproblematically, because fundamental to the capitalist system is the idea that if there is profit being made, it is at the expense of the workers that are creating that profit. Not to get all, there is no ethical consumption under capitalism, but actually to get exactly like that, because that's exactly what I'm saying, yeah. And as I'm approaching the end of this, I want to just drive this home to like, I don't know, the point or the thesis of the whole video, which is not to make people feel bad for their consumption habits, because again, as I have just said, I do not believe that you can ethically consume anything. My point in bringing all this up is that, I don't know, I wish there was more conversation about these issues in K-pop, because the industry is so targeted towards and marketed towards young people. There are a lot of fans and people who, through no fault of their own, do not have the experience or media literacy yet to critically take in and consume the content that these K-pop companies are putting out. And I know that my video is not going to do really anything to help that, because it's not like I have a lot of subscribers anyway, and even if I did, it's a drop of water in the bucket in terms of the K-pop industry. But I feel obligated to talk about it anyway because I wish that more people did, you know? And it really, I don't know, as someone who grew up, you know, poor, it is hard to watch the celebration of wealth within K-pop that I know is so much created deliberately by people that are already wealthy in order to justify their own existence and to further perpetuate it by taking money from people who have less. And what I want to say with that as well is, like, if anyone is even still watching at the end of this very long video, I just hope to God you never, ever, ever feel bad for not being able to support an idol group as much as you want to. You know, there's a lot of like pressure to like, you gotta be streaming, you gotta be buying albums, you gotta be doing stuff that contributes to charting. And it is so upsetting to me to witness that idea being perpetuated by fellow people, fellow fans, fellow people in the same position of like being relatively disadvantaged, you know, compared to the idols that we're supposed to be supporting. Ignore this setup. It'll get explained in a later video. But yeah, this was quite the rant. It was also totally like not structured or scripted. So I just hope that I got some ideas across not terribly. If you have any further thoughts, I would really love to hear them. Even if you like disagree with something that I said, or especially if you think I like missed something relative to this topic, because obviously, like I said, I really feel like class and money is a topic that intersects with and impacts like every single fucking thing in our lives. So I know I missed stuff and probably stuff that's important. So if you feel that I did, you know, please comment and share with everybody so that we can all read your thoughts. I would really, really love to hear them. I don't even know if people are gonna watch this or watch the whole thing because it is so ranty. And I know it's uncomfortable to talk about because on the one hand, we don't like to talk about money in general. We don't like to say anything that might make idols look bad in general. And again, I'm part of this group. I don't want to seem like I'm not a fan or like not emotionally invested. I definitely am. I'm not saying I'm like better than everybody else who feels that way because I also feel that way. I just think it's important to tease out the economic forces and incentives behind what we do and the things that are going on and the things that we think, because if we're not aware of them, we can't ever do anything to help them or counteract them, you know? You can love something and criticize it at the same time. And actually, I think a lot of the time we are most critical of the things we love the most because they have the most potential to be great and because we care about them and want them to be better more than any other thing. Well, that was the rantiest thing that I've ever done, and I have sleeved all the photo cards. So we will end it there. Like I said, I would absolutely love to know your thoughts and feelings on this issue. And if you have any ideas for other discussion topics that you want me to cover in a future video like this, please let me know. You know, I would love to hear what people want to hear about and talk about themselves. All right, thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.